The thermometer outside Yelena Pavlova's cabin registered -67 degrees Celsius when the wolves arrived. At 73 years old, this Yakut grandmother had survived more brutal winters than most people could imagine, but even she felt her breath catch as she watched the pack of 8 massive gray shapes emerge from the swirling snow like ghosts materializing from another world. They moved with the calculated patience of predators who understood that in this kind of cold, everything alive was just one mistake away from becoming their next meal. Yelena pressed her weathered face against the frost-covered window, her dark eyes tracking the wolves as they circled her small wooden cabin. The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the shutters and sending ice crystals spiraling past the glass in hypnotic patterns. Inside, the fire in her wood stove crackled and popped, the only sound competing with the storm's relentless fury. She had been alone in this remote cabin for 3 days now, waiting for her grandson Pavel to return from his hunting expedition. But the blizzard had made travel impossible. What she hadn't told anyone, what she couldn't tell anyone, was that Pavel wasn't just late, he was injured, barely conscious, and hidden in the small root cellar beneath her kitchen floor. The largest wolf, a magnificent creature with silver-tipped fur and intelligent yellow eyes, stopped directly in front of her door. It lifted its massive head and tested the air, nostrils flaring as it caught the scent of warm blood and human fear. Yelena knew that smell would draw them closer. Pavel's leg wound from his fall into a hidden ice crevasse had been bleeding for 2 days. Despite her best efforts to clean and bandage it with traditional Yakut remedies her grandmother had taught her decades ago, the metallic scent of blood was like a dinner bell to these hungry predators. Yelena moved away from the window with the careful deliberation of someone who had learned to conserve every movement in extreme cold. At her age, every calorie burned was precious, every gesture calculated. She wore 3 layers of traditional Yakut clothing, reindeer fur closest to her skin, then wool, then an outer layer of wind-resistant fabric her late husband had sewn for her 40 years ago. Her feet were wrapped in thick felt boots that her own hands had crafted, and her gray hair was braided and tucked beneath a fur-lined cap that had belonged to her mother. The cabin itself was a masterpiece of Yakut survival engineering, built by her grandfather using traditional techniques passed down through generations. The logs were fitted so tightly that even hurricane-force winds couldn't find gaps to exploit. The roof was reinforced with additional timber and packed with insulation made from dried grasses and animal fur. Small as it was, just 2 rooms and the root cellar, it had sheltered her family through winters that would have killed anyone foolish. Enough to challenge the Siberian wilderness without proper preparation. She moved to the kitchen area and carefully lifted the wooden planks that covered the entrance to the root cellar. Below, in the dim light cast by her oil lamp, she could see Pavel's pale face. Her 28-year-old grandson was unconscious again, his breathing shallow but steady. The infection in his leg was spreading despite her constant care, and she knew that without proper medical attention, he would die within days. But the nearest hospital was over 200 kilometers away, and in this weather, even the most experienced drivers wouldn't attempt the journey. "I'm still here, my boy," she whispered in Yakut, her native language feeling warm and comforting in the cold air. "Grandmother is watching over you." Pavel stirred slightly but didn't wake. Yelena had been feeding him small sips of hot broth made from dried meat and herbs, trying to keep his strength up, but his body was fighting a losing battle against infection and blood loss. She had already used most of her medical supplies, antiseptic, bandages, pain medication, and was now relying entirely on traditional Yakut healing methods her ancestors had used for thousands of years. Above them, the wolves were becoming bolder. Yelena could hear them moving around the cabin, their claws clicking against the ice-covered wood as they searched for weakness in her defenses. One of them had discovered the smoke hole where her chimney pipe exited the roof, and she could hear it sniffing and whimpering as the warm air carried the sense of food and injured prey. Yelena had faced wolves before, but never under these circumstances. Usually wolves in Yakutia avoided human settlements, preferring to hunt reindeer and smaller game in the vast wilderness. But this winter had been particularly harsh, even by Siberian standards. The temperature had dropped below -60 degrees and stayed there for weeks, killing off much of the wildlife that wolves normally hunted. Desperation had driven them closer to human habitation, and the scent of Pavel's blood had drawn them directly to her door. She checked her supplies methodically, taking inventory of everything that might help her protect Pavel. She had a hunting rifle with 12 rounds of ammunition, but shooting in this cold was problematic. Metal became brittle at extreme temperatures, and her arthritis made precise aiming difficult. She also had several knives, a small hatchet, and various tools for maintaining the cabin and processing food. Most importantly, she had fire, lots of wood, kerosene, and the knowledge of how to use flame as both tool and weapon. The temperature inside the cabin hovered around -10 degrees Celsius, which felt tropical compared to the deadly cold outside. Yelena had learned long ago that in extreme cold, the difference between life and death often came down to maintaining that crucial buffer of warmth. Every time she opened the door, precious heat would escape, potentially lowering the internal temperature enough to threaten Pavel's survival. The wolves seemed to sense this vulnerability, testing her resolve by scratching at the door and windows, forcing her to choose between investigating the threats and conserving the heat that was keeping her grandson alive. As the hours passed, Yelena found herself thinking about her life in this harsh but beautiful land. She had been born in a traditional Yakut village, raised by parents who still remembered the old ways of surviving in one of the coldest inhabited places on Earth. Her childhood had been filled with stories of ancestors who had thrived in this landscape for over 1,000 years, developing unique skills and knowledge that allowed them not just to survive but to create a rich culture in conditions that would kill most humans within hours. She remembered her grandmother telling her about the sacred relationship between the Yakut people and the land itself. "The cold is not our enemy," the old woman had said. "It is a teacher, showing us how to be strong, how to be patient, how to respect the power of nature. Those who listen to its lessons live long lives. Those who fight against it perish quickly." Now, as wolves prowled outside her cabin and her grandson fought for his life in the root cellar below, Yelena understood those words more deeply than ever before. The cold wasn't trying to kill them, it simply existed, indifferent to human struggle or suffering. It was up to her to work within its rules, to use her knowledge and experience to create a pocket of survival in the midst of deadly conditions. Around midnight, the largest wolf began clawing at the door with renewed determination. Yelena could hear the wood splintering under its powerful claws, could see ice crystals falling from the doorframe as the animal's efforts grew more frantic. She realized that her scent, combined with Pavel's blood and the warmth radiating from the cabin, had triggered the pack's hunting instincts beyond the point of normal caution. They were committed now, willing to risk injury or death to reach what they perceived as vulnerable prey. Yelena made her decision. She couldn't wait for rescue that might never come, couldn't hope that the wolves would eventually give up and move on. Pavel's condition was deteriorating, and her own strength was limited. At 73, she didn't have many more days of this kind of struggle left in her. If she was going to save her grandson, she had to act while she still had the physical and mental resources to be effective. She began her preparations with the same methodical care she brought to every aspect of survival. First, she banked the fire in the wood stove, ensuring that it would continue burning for several hours without attention. Then she moved to the kitchen and lit her kerosene camping stove, setting a large pot of water to boil. While it heated, she gathered every piece of flammable material in the cabin: old newspapers, kindling, strips of cloth, even some of her precious kerosene reserves. The plan forming in her mind was risky, possibly suicidal, but it was the only strategy she could think of that might actually work. Wolves were intelligent animals, but they were also driven by instinct. Their pack hunting behavior was sophisticated, but it relied on predictable patterns of attack and retreat. If she could disrupt those patterns, confuse their expectations, she might be able to drive them away long enough to get Pavel to safety. She checked on her grandson one more time. His fever had worsened, and she could see dark lines spreading up his leg from the infected wound. Even if she managed to save them both from the wolves, Pavel would need medical attention within the next 24 hours or he would die from blood poisoning. But first things first, she had to survive the night. The sound of splintering wood grew louder. One of the wolves had found a weak spot in the doorframe and was working at it systematically, like a carpenter with claws instead of tools. Yelena estimated she had maybe 30 minutes before they broke through. That would have to be enough time to execute her plan. She dressed in her heaviest outdoor gear, layering every piece of warm clothing she owned. Then she filled 2 large thermoses with boiling water and strapped them to her body, creating portable sources of heat that might keep her alive long enough to complete her mission. She loaded her rifle and checked her ammunition, though she hoped she wouldn't need to rely on marksmanship in the dark and cold. Finally, she gathered her flammable materials and soaked them in kerosene, creating crude but effective incendiary devices. The cabin door gave way with a loud crack just as Yelena was making her final preparations. The largest wolf pushed through first, its massive head swinging from side to side as it tested the air inside the warm space. Behind it, the other pack members crowded forward, their eyes reflecting the firelight like yellow stars in the darkness. Yelena stood perfectly still, letting the animals see her, letting them process the reality of their situation. She wasn't running, wasn't showing fear or aggression. Instead, she began speaking to them in Yakut, using the low, rhythmic chanting her grandmother had taught her for communicating with wild animals. The words were ancient, passed down through generations of people who had learned to coexist with the dangerous beauty of the Siberian wilderness. The wolves paused, confused by her calm response to their invasion. This wasn't how prey was supposed to behave. They had expected panic, running, the smell of terror that would trigger their killing instincts. Instead, they found an old woman who stood like a tree, rooted and unafraid, speaking in sounds that seemed almost familiar. Yelena used their momentary hesitation to light her first incendiary device. The kerosene-soaked cloth blazed to life, casting wild shadows on the cabin walls and filling the air with acrid smoke. She threw it toward the door, not at the wolves directly, but close enough that the flames created a barrier between them and the rest of the cabin. The animals retreated instinctively, respect for fire encoded in their DNA after millions of years of evolution. But Yelena wasn't done. She lit a second firebomb and threw it outside, into the snow near the cabin's front wall, then a third, and a fourth, creating a semicircle of flame that turned the area around her door into a flickering smoke-filled maze. The wolves backed away further, their pack formation breaking down as individual animals made different decisions about how to respond to this unexpected development. Now came the most dangerous part of her plan. Yelena picked up a burning piece of kindling in each hand and walked straight toward the largest wolf, the pack leader whose decision would determine how the others behaved. She moved slowly, deliberately, chanting continuously in Yakut, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. The wolf held its ground for a moment, yellow eyes locked on hers, then took a step backward. Yelena followed, keeping the same pace, maintaining eye contact, never breaking the rhythm of her chanting. She was using every technique her ancestors had developed for dealing with predators: fire, voice, confident body language, and most importantly, the projection of calm authority that marked her as something other than helpless prey. Step by step, she walked the pack leader away from her cabin, using the burning sticks to guide its retreat while the other wolves followed their leader's example. When she judged the pack had withdrawn far enough, Yelena began the most critical phase of her strategy. She threw both burning sticks high into the air, creating a brief shower of sparks and flame that startled the wolves into running. Then she turned and sprinted back toward her cabin, moving faster than she had in years. Fueled by desperation and the knowledge that she had only seconds before the pack regrouped and possibly attacked, she made it through the doorway and immediately began barricading the entrance with furniture, tools, anything heavy enough to slow another assault. But to her amazement, the attack never came. Through the broken door, she could see the wolves retreating into the darkness, apparently deciding that prey which fought back with fire and showed no fear was worth the risk of injury. Yelena collapsed into her rocking chair, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow. Her hands were shaking from adrenaline and cold, and she could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. But Pavel was safe, the cabin was secure, and she had successfully defended their small sanctuary against impossible odds. As dawn broke over the Siberian wilderness, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold, Yelena heard the sound she had been praying for, the distant rumble of a snowmobile engine. Through her frosted window, she could see Pavel's friend Dmitri approaching, pulling a rescue sled behind his powerful machine. He had managed to navigate the treacherous trails despite the storm, guided by his GPS and his intimate knowledge of the local terrain. But as Yelena opened the door to wave Dmitri toward the cabin, she discovered something that would change everything she thought she knew about the previous night's events. In the snow around her door, illuminated by the morning light, she could see the wolf tracks clearly for the first time. There had been no pack of 8 animals stalking her cabin. There had been only one wolf, a lone female, and beside her smaller tracks were the unmistakable paw prints of 3 cubs. The attack she had survived hadn't been a predatory assault at all. It had been a desperate mother trying to find shelter for her babies in the deadly cold, drawn by the warmth radiating from Yelena's cabin. The scratching at the door had been an attempt to break in, and kill it had been the frantic efforts of a parent trying to save her young from freezing to death. The intelligence Yelena had seen in those yellow eyes hadn't been calculating hunger, but maternal desperation that mirrored her own fierce protectiveness of Pavel. Understanding flooded through her as she realized that 2 grandmothers had faced each other in the darkness, each fighting to protect the young lives in their care. The wolf mother had eventually retreated not because she feared Yelena's fire, but because she recognized a kindred spirit, another female willing to die defending her family. In that moment of mutual recognition, both had stepped back from a confrontation that would have benefited no one. Dmitri's snowmobile pulled up to the cabin just as Yelena spotted something that confirmed her realization. About 50 meters away, near a cluster of large boulders, she could see a small cave entrance that had been invisible in the darkness and blowing snow. Smoke was rising from the opening, not the black smoke of a fire, but the white vapor of warm breath in cold air. The wolf mother had found her own shelter, her own way to keep her cubs alive through the brutal night. As Dmitri helped load Pavel onto the rescue sled, carefully wrapping the unconscious young man in warming blankets, and preparing him for the journey to the hospital, Yelena took one last look toward the distant cave. She couldn't see the wolves, but she knew they were there. A family that had survived against impossible odds through the same combination of courage, intelligence, and fierce protective love that had carried her through the darkness. "Grandmother Yelena," Dmitri called, his voice muffled by the heavy scarf wrapped around his face. "We need to leave now, before another storm moves in." "Pavel needs a doctor immediately." Yelena nodded and climbed onto the sled behind her grandson, but not before leaving something behind. From her precious food supplies, she took several strips of dried reindeer meat and placed them near the cave entrance, far enough away that the wolf mother wouldn't see it as a threat, close enough that she would find it when hunger drove her to hunt. It was a gesture of respect between 2 survivors, an acknowledgement that in the vast, indifferent wilderness of Yakutia, all mothers were sisters in the ancient struggle to keep their young alive. The journey to the hospital took 4 hours through treacherous terrain, but Pavel survived, his infection responding to modern antibiotics and his wounded leg healing completely over the following weeks. He never learned exactly what his grandmother had endured during those 3 days alone in the cabin, because Yelena never told the complete story. Some experiences, she felt, were too personal to share, too deeply woven into the fabric of her relationship with the land that had shaped her people for generations. But sometimes on the coldest nights, when the wind howled around her home in the village and the temperature dropped below -60, Yelena would think about the wolf mother and wonder if she and her cubs had survived the winter. In her dreams, she imagined them thriving, the cubs growing strong and learning the hard lessons of survival that would carry them through their own future challenges. It was a thought that brought her comfort and reminded her that heroism often came not from defeating enemies, but from recognizing that sometimes the greatest courage lay in choosing compassion over conflict, understanding over fear. The story of that night became part of Yelena's private collection of survival memories, filed away with decades of other experiences that had taught her how to endure in one of the harshest environments on Earth. She had protected her grandson, defended her home, and discovered that even in the most desperate circumstances, wisdom and empathy could transform potential tragedy into unexpected connection. What incredible stories of survival and unexpected connections have shaped your own life? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and do not forget to subscribe for more amazing tales of human endurance and the surprising bonds that can form in the most challenging situations.